One more time for the greatest team in America.
When I came up for my tryouts, my mom and daddy, we drove up from Florida. I was accepted into school, and I brought my own footballs, really did, my whole bag of footballs. And I met Coach Healy, who was the defense coordinator at the time, and Doc Spurgeon, out on the soccer field, which is across from Wendy's on Fair Road. And then as we were doing the tour, I got to meet Coach Russell. But I knew who he was anyway. Grew up a Gator fan down in Florida, 30 miles from Gainesville. Dad would take me to the Georgia-Florida game. And I remember telling him about Georgia Southern, and he asked me who the coach was, and I told him. He said, "Oh, Lord, son." And I said, "What?" He said, "He's that crazy guy that headbutt the team, the blood all going down his face." And I said, I was scared, right? Because I'm thinking, here's this, oh, what a lovable man.
When I came down for my official visit, I got to meet Coach Russell. And, we spent a lot of time with him during the meeting, and I left after my official visit. Finally, my coach, he called me one day in school. "When are you gonna stop playing around and tell him you're coming?" I said, "Let's go do it now." So we went to his office, called Coach Jay Russell. I committed. That night, University of Georgia called me, offered me a scholarship. I'm like, well, I said, "I'm good. I committed to Georgia Southern today. I'm staying with it. I'm fine." And we went back and forth. "We want you to start school this spring." I said, "No." He said, "Well, let's consider it." I said, "Okay, I'll consider it." Next day, Coach Russell showed up at my house. He called me, he said, "I'm at your school. Tell me how to get to your house." So he spent 2 hours in my house talking to me and my grandfather. And I said, "Coach, gave you my word yesterday I was coming. I'll be there." And that's it. And I came here, and I think it's the best decision I made.
I'm here as a freshman during camp. Shaved head, everything. For whatever reason, I'm sure we were supposed to, I was like the last guy out of the locker room. So Coach Russell was still around a lot back then, and I opened the locker room door in Hanner and turned the door and literally run face to face with Coach Russell. I didn't say, "Oh, excuse me," or anything, because I could not speak. I was standing in front of Jesus Christ himself in my mind, and he says, "Well, son, how was practice?" Couldn't speak. I literally just sat there like an idiot. And he laughed and slapped me on the shoulder and said, "Well, it must have been a good one," and walked off. And then I'm walking away, what an idiot. I didn't even speak to the man, but that was how I saw him.
And then meeting him throughout the summer. Some folks know, especially former players, is during the summer, Coach Russell would write you letters, send letters to you, and it was a calendar, and on the calendar it had little notes on it. You get to Sunday, for instance, it would say a day of rest, go to church, that sort of thing. And then Monday, get out and run, GATA, and he'd have little sayings throughout the week. So we got little notes from him throughout the summer. So you kind of got to know him before you met him again.
I think the first time I met him, he was kind of cutting up with me, and I think his line was, "When in doubt, don't punt, bunt." So that's kind of irked. Pretty cool thing, I actually have a picture still to this day when I'm a young kid. I'm not sure how old I am, but he was still at Georgia at the time, but I'm at a Georgia football camp, and standing on a box at the time, and on one side is Coach Dooley, and on the other side is Coach Russell. And I've held on to that picture, still have it to this day.
I was there for the good years with Irk. I mean, I obviously never got to play for him, but he, that speech he made to the team right before he passed, I was there in that room, and he has such an amazing way of connecting with people. He came in and you're thinking, "Oh my God, this is Irk Russell," legend, and he started out with this long-winded joke where we didn't know it was a joke at the time. He's just telling a story, and then you hear the punchline, and you're like, and then he had the room, and we were just sitting there just in awe listening to him and stories, and he's just a great communicator and talker. When we have monuments built about him here and all the stories, I got to see that live, so that was always very big.
My next door neighbor at that time was a guy named T.Z. Lanier, and T.Z. had lived in Athens, and he and his wife were social friends with Coach Russell and his wife Jean. And so he was all excited when Coach Russell got the job, and he and I rode out to the college, and Coach Russell was coming out of Dale Lick's office, had just agreed to become the head coach at Georgia Southern. That was before the press conference. And Coach and TZ introduced us, and that's when he told me, there's enough talent in Georgia. All we need to do is close the borders. We can be a winning program by getting Georgia players. And it turned out to be the truth.
I went over to his trailer when he was still in the trailer with the sunken bathtub with the mirrors all around and that kind of thing. And I did go over, and Sue Colson was his secretary. And I asked to see Irk, and I'm not sure if I had met him before then, but a friend of mine wanted an autographed 8x10 of Coach Russell because he was starting a sports shop and wanted a picture. I said, well, I think I can get that for you. And so I had gone over. That might have been the first time I met him, and he, of course, very gracious and said, of course. And after a little while, I mentioned him. I said, now, Coach, I said, my husband, Dan, graduated from Georgia Tech. And he looked at me as only Irk Russell can look at somebody. And I wish I could imitate him, but of course I can't. And he said, well, Wanda, we're just gonna have to help him overcome it. That's a funny question. I don't think I've ever been asked that the first time I met him, but you never forget Irk. So he was amazing.
I grew to realize that Irk Russell was something special, even more than the Georgia coach. For some reason, he stood out in the people's minds as something really special. So I asked their president if I could approach him. And he said, sure. So I did. And on his third visit, he and his wife sat in my office later in the day on that visit. And he said, I got 3 questions for you, Dale. And I said, okay. He asked me the first one, I had a good answer. He asked me the second one, I had a good answer. And then he asked me the third one. And it wasn't anything I could do. And the phone rang. So I got up and excused myself, went out, picked up the phone, and one of the supporters said, this is what we can do for Irk. And that was the answer to the third question. And he said, we'll make a decision and let you know. And on the way home, they made the decision to come. And that really, I think, was one of the most significant things in terms of this football program being what it is today, that everybody believed in Irk Russell.